Gunfire tore through the trees around me as I pressed my shoulder against a crumbling wall, blood running down my sleeve and dripping from my fingers into the dirt below. The radio crackled hard against my ear. "Extraction in 30 seconds, the pilot said. I forced myself upright and started moving toward the clearing. "I'm hit but I can move. Don't leave without me." Static. Then a voice came through, Cole Merritt, my squad partner of 3 years. His tone was flat and completely empty of anything I recognized. "She's compromised. We're pulling out." "Cole, I'm still alive." I screamed into the radio. "I'm right here." The channel cut dead. I broke through the tree line just as the helicopter rose above the clearing. I waved both arms until my injured shoulder screamed with pain. The side door was open. Someone was sitting just inside it, close enough that I could see his face clearly. My brother Nathan. He looked at me once, just once, and then deliberately turned away. The helicopter carried them both up into the dark sky without me. My name is Paige Edward. The 2 men on that helicopter were the only real family I had left in the world. I had spent 4 years earning my place in the 14th Special Operations Unit, the same unit my brother Nathan had built his entire career inside. He was the one who had suggested I apply. He had sat across the dinner table and told me I was exactly the kind of soldier they needed. I had believed every word of it completely. What I did not understand then was the difference between being invited somewhere and being genuinely wanted there. I learned that difference slowly, through small moments I kept making excuses for it, the way conversations stopped when I walked into rooms, the way Cole and Nathan exchanged quick looks during briefings I was not supposed to notice, the way my performance reviews always landed just slightly below what my actual results deserved. I had fought hard for every single inch of ground I gained in that unit. I had told myself that if I just worked hard enough and performed well enough, respect would follow naturally. I was completely wrong about that. The memory surfaced on its own about 6 months before the mission, sharp and uninvited. I had been walking back from a late equipment check when I heard voices through a half-open door in the operations corridor. Cole's voice came first, low and certain. "She slows us down. Every time there is a high-pressure call, she hesitates. She is a problem we don't need." Then Nathan. My own brother. Calm and businesslike. "I know. I am working on it." I had pressed myself flat against the wall outside that door and held completely still. My first instinct was that they were talking about someone else, a newer soldier, someone who was genuinely struggling to keep up. I waited another full minute, listening for a name. They never said one. But then Cole spoke again, and he used the words "your sister" in the same flat tone he used to describe faulty equipment. I walked away without letting either of them know I had been there. I told myself I had misunderstood the context. That they were frustrated and venting. That it would pass. I believed that for 6 more months. Back in the present, the choice was simple: move or die. I chose the first one without hesitation. I found an abandoned supply outpost half a mile east of the tree line. It was small and mostly cleared out, but a partial medical kit sat on a shelf near the back wall. I cleaned the wound in my left arm as best I could, wrapped it tight with whatever I had, took the remaining supplies and got back outside before I let myself feel any of it. The anger helped. It burned steadier and hotter than the pain, and it kept my legs moving when everything else wanted to stop. I focused it on one thought. They had expected me to die out here without a single witness. Then I heard it, movement in the trees behind me. Not random. Not an animal. Deliberate and patterned, the way trained soldiers move when they are sweeping a specific area. I changed direction immediately and picked up my pace, staying low through the undergrowth, my heart loud in my ears. They were not searching the general area. They were coming for me. I moved fast and stayed low, doubling back twice to break my trail. But the patrols were not sweeping randomly. They cut across the terrain in coordinated patterns, checking locations in sequence, as if working from information that showed exactly where I had already been. When I changed direction and pushed north toward higher ground, another patrol appeared from the north within 20 minutes, positioned perfectly to cut me off before I reached the ridge. This was not a standard enemy sweep searching for a missing soldier in a general area. They were tracking me specifically. The precision was too consistent and too fast to be coincidental. Enemy forces operating in this region did not have access to real-time unit positions, unless someone had provided those positions directly to them. Someone with access to our mission communications had told them exactly where I was. I crouched behind a fallen tree in the dark, breathing carefully, working through everything I knew. The betrayal had not ended when that helicopter left the ground. It was still happening right now, in real time from somewhere inside my own unit. I found it on the third day while changing out my gear in a shallow ravine where I had stopped to rest. It was small, barely larger than my thumbnail, sewn carefully into the lining of my tactical vest with precise stitching that did not match the standard military manufacturing pattern. I only found it because one corner of the thread had begun to loosen, creating a small ridge I felt when I ran my hand across the inner lining. I cut it out slowly and held it in my palm. Military-issue hardware. The kind used for tracking assets during covert operations. The kind that required high-level clearance to program and authorize for deployment. I turned it over and thought about who had access to my personal gear in the 48 hours before we deployed. That was a very short list. A list with very familiar names on it. I set the chip on a flat rock and crushed it cleanly under my boot. Then I stood up and let the full weight of it settle. This betrayal had not started in the field during a moment of panic or poor judgment. Every piece of it had been arranged carefully before we ever left base. By the end of the third day I had eaten almost nothing, slept in broken stretches of less than an hour, and covered enough ground that my legs had stopped feeling like my own. The wound in my arm throbbed constantly. My vision kept narrowing at the edges when I pushed too hard uphill. I sat against a tree in the dark and found myself genuinely uncertain whether I could get back up. Then a memory came, completely unprompted and perfectly clear. Nathan 10 years earlier. The two of us behind our family house on a cold winter afternoon. He was 15 and I was 12, and he was teaching me how to navigate using stars and how to build a fire from nothing but bark and dry grass. He had been patient and serious, and every time I got something right, he looked genuinely proud of me. That boy, that version of my brother, had taught me exactly how to survive a night like this one. I used everything he had ever shown me. I thought about what he had become since then. And then I got back up. They took me on the morning of the fourth day. I had been moving through a narrow pass between two ridgelines when 3 soldiers stepped out of the trees directly ahead. I was too exhausted and too exposed to run. I raised my hands and they moved quickly and professionally, and within minutes I was blindfolded and moving through the dark. They did not hurt me. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The interrogation room was small and plain. When the blindfold came off, the man across the table did not ask about my mission details or my unit's current position. He asked about command structure, about how decisions were made above the field level, about who authorized which operations and who they reported to. He asked questions that someone already familiar with our general operations would ask. Someone confirming specific details they mostly already knew from another source. I answered nothing out loud, but I listened to every single question with complete attention, because the pattern of what he was asking me told me exactly what kind of information someone had already been giving him. They put me in a small holding room with thin walls and a door that did not close flush against its frame. Guards changed shifts around midnight. In the 20 minutes between the old shift departing and the new one settling in, 2 of them stood just outside my door and talked in low, relaxed voices, the way people speak when they believe nothing important is listening nearby. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door and concentrated on every word. They were discussing a recent exchange. Information passed through a secured channel. Payment received on the other end. Access granted in return. Most of it was vague enough to be meaningless without context. But then one of them spoke a name while confirming a specific detail. Colmerit. I stood completely still against that wall and kept my breathing even. My partner. The man who had given the order to leave me behind. His name was being used casually and familiarly by enemy soldiers in a foreign holding room. Not as an opponent they had encountered in the field. As a contact they had been conducting business with. The second night gave me my window. I had spent 24 hours studying the guard rotation, when they moved, where they paused, how long each changeover took. The incoming shift consistently took 4 minutes longer to reach full coverage than the outgoing shift left it. 4 minutes was enough if I moved without hesitating once. I worked the door hinge free using a thin strip of metal I had separated from the sole of my boot across an entire day of careful, quiet work. The door swung open without sound. I moved along the walls quickly, heading toward the communications room I had been walked past twice during transfers. The door was unlocked. A laptop sat open on the table inside, and a small data drive was plugged into its side. I took the drive, tucked it deep into the inner lining of my jacket, and walked out the back of the building into the cold night air beyond. The information on that drive might mean nothing at all, or it might be the only proof I would ever have access to. I ran. I moved for 18 hours without stopping. The wound in my arm had reopened somewhere around hour 10. I packed it tight with strips torn from my jacket lining and kept moving forward. My left arm barely functioned. My vision kept narrowing at the edges when I pushed hard on the climbs. But I fixed my eyes on the direction of friendly territory and kept putting one foot in front of the other, because stopping was simply not something I was willing to do. I thought about Cole sitting calm on that helicopter, Nathan turning his face away, the data drive pressed tight against my ribs, the name spoken so easily through a thin holding room wall. They had planned every piece of this. The tracking chip in my gear, the extraction order, the coordination that had been happening long before that mission ever began. They had expected my story to end quietly out here in the dark where no one would ask questions. I refused. Then I saw them ahead. Rescue lights, white and yellow beams sweeping slowly across the terrain below a distant ridge. I took 3 more steps toward them. The ground came up fast and everything went completely dark. I woke up to the steady beeping of a monitor above my head, and the sharp smell of antiseptic thick in the air around me. White ceiling, bright overhead lights, the specific stillness of a room built to keep people from moving too quickly. A military field hospital. The doctor standing at the foot of my bed had a clipboard and was writing in measured routine strokes. Then he looked up and saw that my eyes were open. He stopped writing completely. He stared at me the way a person stares at something that directly contradicts what they know to be factually true. "You were declared Kia," he said finally. His voice came out careful and quiet. "Killed in action. The report was filed 5 days ago." I held his gaze and said nothing. He set the clipboard down slowly. "The death certificate," he continued, "was signed by your commanding officer." He paused just briefly. "Nathan Edward. My own brother had signed my death certificate while I was still alive, injured, and fighting my way home through hostile territory." I closed my eyes and breathed slowly and steadily. And I began to plan. Word moved through the hospital ward quickly once staff understood I was alive. I was told to rest and keep a low profile, which I did on the outside. On the inside, I collected every piece of information I could reach from my hospital bed. A corpsman named Pete who had known me before the mission came to check on me on my second day in the ward. He was careful and kind, and after a few minutes of quiet conversation he told me what had been happening in the weeks since I was declared dead. Cole Merritt was being publicly celebrated. A formal ceremony had been scheduled on base. The official story described him as a leader who had made a critical tactical decision under extreme pressure, preserving the lives of the soldiers under his command. My brother Nathan had personally written the formal recommendation for Cole's promotion to the exact rank that had been designated as my next career step before the mission was ever assigned. They had built Cole's entire future on top of what they believed was my grave, and everyone around them had applauded. On my 3rd day in the hospital, a senior officer came to see me. He was not there to check on my recovery. I understood that before he even pulled the chair close to my bedside. He sat down, folded his hands neatly, and looked at me with the practiced calm of a man delivering a message he had been specifically sent to deliver. "You have been through something serious," he said. "The priority right now is your physical recovery. Rest. Stabilize. Give your body the time it needs." I watched him without speaking. He held my gaze steadily. "There will be time to debrief properly, to raise any concerns, through the correct channels with the appropriate people involved." He paused deliberately. Some situations, when handled impulsively, have a way of becoming far more complicated than they need to be. He stood, straightened his jacket, and looked at me one final time. "Some things are better left exactly where they are," he said quietly. Then he walked out and closed the door behind him. I lay in that hospital bed and stared at the ceiling above me. They had learned I was alive, and they were already working to contain me before I could move. I was moved to a private recovery room on my 5th day. which meant more space and significantly less monitoring. I had been waiting for exactly that. I had kept the data drive pressed into the inner lining of my jacket through every examination and every dressing change. Nobody had searched for it because nobody knew it existed. Pete lent me a small personal laptop without asking many questions. I told him I needed to reach family. He left it on the bedside table and closed the door behind him without another word. I plugged in the drive. It took several minutes to load. Most of what appeared on the screen was encrypted, compressed data that looked like random noise to anyone without the right tools to read it. But sections of it were only partially secured, sitting in unencrypted file headers and communication logs that had been improperly protected by whoever set them up. What I could read immediately made my hands go completely still on the keyboard. Timestamps, coordinates, references to communication channels that had no business existing between the parties listed in those logs. And amounts. Dollar figures attached to precise dates that matched our mission timeline exactly. I could not break the full encryption alone. I needed someone with the technical skill to do it, and the personal integrity to keep it private. Pete connected me with a signals analyst named Harper, who worked in base communications. She had a reputation for being precise, private, and completely uninterested in the kind of political maneuvering that consumed most people in her position. She came to see me on a Tuesday evening, listened to everything I told her in about 10 minutes, and said very little in response. Then she took the drive and came back 2 days later with a folder of decoded fragments. Payment transfers routed through accounts connected to a private contractor operating in the same region where our unit had been deployed. Coordinates transmitted through an unauthorized channel before our mission, including the specific location of our squad on the night I was left behind. Names listed on the authorizing end of multiple transactions. Cole Merritt appeared in several entries, but he was not the only name in those files. Harper placed her finger on a second name without speaking a word. I already knew whose it was before I even looked down. Nathan Edwards' name appeared in 7 separate entries across the decoded files. Most of them were authorizations, changes to mission parameters submitted through official channels, timed in ways that only made logical sense if the person submitting them already knew exactly what was planned to happen in the field. He had adjusted our squad's designated extraction zone 48 hours before deployment. The adjustment had been logged as a routine operational update. Nobody had flagged it because it came from a commanding officer with full clearance and no prior history of disciplinary issues. But the new extraction zone placed me further from the helicopter's reachable range than the original plan. If I fell behind or took a hit during the operation, the added distance made it completely reasonable, even tactically justifiable, to proceed with extraction without me. He had not panicked in the moment. He had not reacted badly under the pressure of combat. He had quietly rearranged the pieces of the mission in advance, so that leaving me behind would look like a difficult but defensible decision rather than what it actually was. He had known exactly what was going to happen to me out there. And he had made sure all the conditions were carefully in place before we ever deployed. 2 days after Harper delivered the decoded files, I received a visitor I had not asked for. A civilian in a plain dark jacket came to my recovery room in the late afternoon when the ward had grown quiet. He did not offer a name. He sat down and spoke quickly and quietly, like a man who had rehearsed every word in advance and wanted to finish before any interruptions. He told me my career was at a critical point, that the people with real influence in this institution had the ability to support my future significantly, or complicate it beyond repair. He said the things I believed I had uncovered could be interpreted in multiple ways, and that interpretation depended entirely on the perspective of the people making the judgment. Then he made the offer simple and direct. Drop everything. Sign a revised debrief statement. Return to service quietly and without any further action. My service record would be clean and my rank fully restored with no questions asked. Push forward with what I had found, and my career would not survive what followed. I looked at him calmly across the small room. "Are you finished?" I asked. He left without answering. I called Major Gary the following morning. He was a military defense attorney with a small office near the base perimeter, a strong reputation for taking difficult cases, and the kind of patience that only develops through years of working within a system that consistently resists being corrected. I laid everything out for him in precise order: the abandonment, the tracking chip, the holding room interrogation, The name I had heard spoken through a thin wall, the data drive and what Ren had decoded from it, Nathan's mission parameter changes, the civilian visitor and his quiet offer. I spoke without rushing and Finch listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You understand what happens the moment we file, he said. There is no quiet version of this process. I know that. Your brother's role becomes part of the permanent official record. I know that too. He studied me for a long moment. Then he took out a clean legal pad and uncapped his pen. We filed the formal complaint with the full evidence package attached before the end of that week. By the following Monday, an official military investigation had been opened. The truth was no longer something only I was carrying alone. The formal hearing took place in a military courtroom on a gray Thursday morning. I arrived early, sat down beside Major Gary, and arranged my papers without looking around the room. I had spent the 2 previous days reviewing every piece of evidence until I could walk through it in exact order without checking a single note. Cole Merritt entered with 2 attorneys and settled into his seat looking composed and unhurried, the posture of a man who had already decided in his own mind how the day would end. He spoke quietly with his legal team and gave every impression of someone facing a minor procedural inconvenience, rather than a formal investigation into treason. Nathan came in separately and took a seat further back near the gallery. Full uniform. An expression of practiced authority arranged carefully on his face. He did not look at me from the moment he entered the room. Not once. The panel took their seats. The room went formal and completely still. Cole's lead attorney opened by describing me as a soldier compromised by trauma, emotionally unstable, and motivated by personal grievance rather than facts. I sat completely still through every word of it. My turn was coming. When Major Gary nodded at me, I stood up. I told the story of that night in exact sequence, from the moment extraction was called to the moment the helicopter lifted without me. No raised voice. No visible emotion. Just facts delivered cleanly and directly to the panel, one after the other. When I sat down, Gary submitted the first piece of evidence. The helicopter's onboard camera had automatically captured the full extraction sequence. Standard flight recording equipment, archived by the pilot and never flagged for deletion because nobody had thought to check the flight archive. Gary had obtained the recording through official discovery. The footage played on the screen at the front of the room. My voice came through the audio track first, shouting into the radio clear and completely unmistakable. Then Cole's voice. Flat. Calm. Decided. She's compromised. We're pulling out. The courtroom went completely still. I looked over at Nathan for the first time since the hearing began. He was already looking back at me, and the carefully arranged expression on his face was beginning to come apart at the edges. Gary let the silence sit in the room for a full 30 seconds. Then he called Harper to the stand. She presented the decoded data from the drive methodically and technically, without any drama at all. Payment transfers tied to Cole Merritt across 4 separate transactions. Coordinates transmitted through an unauthorized external channel before our mission, including the precise location of our squad on the night of the operation. Access codes shared with a private contractor operating in direct conflict with our unit's field objectives. She explained what each piece meant in clear and simple language. She showed how the transaction timeline matched the mission timeline exactly. She showed how the transmitted coordinates matched the location where I had been captured and held. Then Gary submitted the final document, the decoded communication log showing the authorizing signatures on the military side of the exchange. Cole Merritt's digital signature appeared in 4 entries. Nathan Edwards appeared in 3. The room absorbed this in complete silence. This was not a soldier who had made a terrible decision under the pressure of combat. This was organized, compensated, deliberate treason, planned well in advance and executed with precision. Cole's composure broke first. He leaned sharply toward his attorneys and the conversation at their table became urgent and tight. One of them stood to challenge the evidence on procedural grounds, raising questions about the chain of custody for the data drive. The panel chair heard the full objection, considered it, and ruled against it. The evidence had been properly submitted through discovery, and stood as presented. Cole's attorney tried a second approach, suggesting the records had been manipulated, and that my testimony was driven entirely by personal grievance. He was skilled and he fought for every available inch of ground. But the helicopter footage was original and unaltered. The payment records had been externally verified. The mission parameter changes Nathan had submitted were part of the official base operations record. No one had thought to remove them because no one had expected me to walk back out of that field alive. Nathan stood from the gallery and attempted to address the panel directly. The panel chair cut him off before he spoke a full sentence. His signed orders were already in evidence. His authorization of the extraction zone adjustment was on the permanent record. The documents had already said everything for him. Cole was stripped of rank before the session ended that day. 6 weeks after the hearing, Major Gary called me with news I had not been expecting. Cole Merritt's rank and his pending promotion had been formally vacated by the review board. The position was now open. After reviewing the full record of the investigation alongside my service history prior to the mission, the board had reached a decision about who should fill it. They wanted me, not as a quiet gesture to settle the matter without further attention. The formal letter that arrived 3 days later was specific in its language: my field performance across my career, my conduct throughout the entire investigation process, and my record before the mission all supported the appointment. The letter used the phrases, demonstrated leadership under pressure, and exceptional composure during institutional adversity. I read it twice at my kitchen table. Then I sat quietly for a while. I thought about the ravine where I had almost stopped moving, about the tracking chip crushed under my boot, about the data drive pressed against my ribs through days of cold and exhaustion and pain. Then I picked up a pen. I signed the acceptance letter without ceremony and without celebration. Quietly, deliberately, the same way I had handled every single thing since the night they left me behind. I stood in my new uniform on a quiet Tuesday morning, alone in front of the mirror in my quarters on base. The rank insignia on my collar was the same one written into Cole Merritt's promotion paperwork before I was left in that field. The same one my brother had helped arrange for a man he had trusted more than his own blood. Cole was gone from the military permanently, facing criminal proceedings that would follow him for the rest of his life. Nathan had been dishonorably discharged and was under active federal investigation. The senior officer who had come to my hospital room and told me some things were better left exactly where they were had been quietly reassigned pending his own review. None of them had been destroyed by anything I had done to them. They had been destroyed entirely by the choices they made the night they decided I was expendable. I turned away from the mirror and walked to the window. Outside, the base moved through its ordinary morning. Soldiers crossing the yard, vehicles pulling in and out, everything continuing as it always had and always would. I had walked out of a place designed to erase me. I had told the truth clearly, calmly, and without bending once under any of the pressure they put on me. And I was still standing. That was the only victory that had ever mattered.